Genesis chapter 2, I'm going to begin in verse 1, and I'm going to read our passage today. It's just 3 verses, but we got a lot to unpack. So I'll read our passage in its entirety, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss. But in verse 1, we're told, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." So in these 3 verses, you see this idea. We're going to be talking about rest, but we're also going to be talking about work. And if you've been with us in this study, God has been at work. You remember in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when we began this study, we saw in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we discussed and looked at that idea that God is our triunal, eternal creator. Before there was a beginning, there was God. And there always will be God. He has no beginning. He has no end. And that eternal triunal creator created the heavens and the earth. But then in verse 2, we saw that what he created was void and without form. So in verse 3, he brought the creation order into play by simply making that decree, "Let there be light." And then from verses 3 through the following, you see a rhythm of these days where God is at work. He's creating, and every day he creates something good. And over the course of those sermons, we saw that God created the waters, and he created the land, and he created the sky, and he populated all of them with all of the living creatures and the fish and the birds. And we're told day by day, it's good, it's good, it's good. And he creates the sun and the moon and the stars to establish rhythms in our life and to give us all that we need to thrive. And that leads to day 6, where he creates the animals of the land. But if you were here last week, he created one living creature different than all the others, and it was you and me. And God created male and female in his image. And we discussed that last week, how we're different than the rest of creation because we represent God, but we're also like God. And we discussed what that means in last week's sermon. And because we're the pinnacle of the creation order, God said it was very good. So God has been at work in days 1 through 6, but then in day 7, we're told he was finished and he begins to rest. Now, I want to point out as day 7 begins, this is the first time where of all 7 days, it doesn't begin by saying, "and God said." Because we talked about this, that his word is the catalyst of creation, that he speaks and things are created. But on day 7 doesn't begin by God saying anything, because we're told all his work was finished. It was done. So instead of speaking more creation into existence, we're told instead he rests on this 7th day. So the question then is, what does it mean that God rests? That's a great question if you're thinking it. Does it mean that he's going to do what we're going to do when we go home? And what do I mean? If you're like me, you're probably going to eat a lunch that's maybe a little too big, and then you're going to go home and you're going to find that chair, and you'll turn on the glowing box, and you're going to get ready for the Super Bowl, and you'll probably doze off maybe in your most comfortable chair, and you will rest for a few minutes. But the reality is, God doesn't find his comfortable chair to sleep in. That's not what he does. God actually never sleeps. Did you know that? In Psalm 121, this is what we're told about the living God. We're told in verse 2, "My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you," here's the key, "will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep." So God is not sleeping on the 7th day because he never sleeps. He's always active, always working, and always present in every place at every time. Well, the question might be, well then, was he just tired? Like, did he need to take a breather like us in the middle of a workout? Does he need to take a breather, take 5? Well, Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 28, "Have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable." So God does not nap, and also God does not get tired. He doesn't get weary. That he created all things without any effort because he's God. So then the question is, what on earth does it mean? Then how can God rest? If you study that Hebrew word for rest, what it actually means in a literal translation is it's the cessation of work. It means he is no longer working. And you might say, well, what does that mean? That he had been creating for 6 days, and on the seventh day, he ceased in his creating. What's interesting, too, is if you study ancient Near Eastern literature, what you'd find in the time of Moses, who's receiving this revelation, the Israelites that he's leading actually already had an understanding of this rhythm to a degree. Because what would happen in ancient times is they would make a temple, a tabernacle for their gods, and those tabernacles that were made by human hands, when they were finished, they believed that the deity would then rest in the tabernacle, that the deity would come in a sense of satisfaction and rest and dwell in that which was built by man. But this tabernacle is much different, because the creation was not made by man. Did you know Paul actually says it's impossible for you or me to build God a house? We're incapable of it. So God built himself a house. He built the creation. And why did he build the creation? Yes, it's to bring glory to himself, but it was to dwell with you and with me. Because if you remember in the creative order, why did he create all those things in days 1 through 5? It was to prepare a place on day 6 for men and women, for us as image bearers of him, to dwell with him so he could be in our midst. So God's desire is to tabernacle with us. It's to dwell with us. And now that he had built his temple, he is resting with his people. He's there with Adam and Eve, and he's enjoying his work. And what I want us to see today is there's 2 ideas I'm going to talk about of why does this day 7 happen. The first one's this. It's more on the theological side, but it's this. God displays his satisfaction on day 7. Why is there a day 7? Through day 7, God is displaying his satisfaction in his creation. God doesn't speak more things into existence. Instead, he blesses the creation. And he calls that 7th day holy. God is celebrating that which he already called good, 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 and then for man, very good. And God is dwelling in the midst of his people, and he is celebrating that he is with them and they are with him. And it is good. And he says, I will bless this day. What's interesting on the 7th day, if you study it, what most scholars will also find and point out is that there is no day or evening that's listed to this day. Did you ever catch that? All the other days, it has that rhythm. There was day and then there was evening. Day 7, there's no close to it. Did you catch that in the text? Instead, it's open-ended. Why is it open-ended? It's because God's desire was for him to rest with his people in the goodness of his creation. Now, what breaks God's rest then? Genesis chapter 3. And we'll get there. But in Genesis chapter 3, what breaks his rest? It's the sin of Adam. The sin of Adam and Eve, and then God is no longer resting. He's back to work. And what does he do? He starts pursuing Adam. He says, Adam, we need to talk about some things. And he goes and pursues him, because that sin broke the goodness of what God had created. And God gets back to work in Genesis 3, rolling out a plan of redemption through a new Adam, Jesus Christ, that will ultimately bring a new creation, the new heavens and the new earth. God is at work today, bringing that vision to fulfillment. That's why I find it so interesting that Jesus Christ, the Word, became flesh, and he began to tabernacle with us here on this earth, although it is broken. When he was on that cross, he said 7 different things. You remember what one of them was? He said, it is finished, tetelestai. And don't you hear that same voice in Genesis when God creates all that is good and he is with his people? He says, it is finished. It's good. Then we messed it up, so the Word became flesh, and then he says it is finished. And what did Jesus finish? He took on our sin and our death, so that now God can tabernacle with us again, that his Spirit can live inside of us and we can have the presence of God in our lives. And when Jesus returns, he will make all things new, and we will physically tabernacle with God for all of eternity future. So what you see on this 7th day is God is resting because everything is good. Man will sin and he'll get back to work. But he's satisfied there in that day 7 with his creation work. But then there's the second reason of why is day 7 there, and this is more of the practical side of the sermon. It's this. In day 7, God is establishing a rhythm for us. On day 7, he's displaying his satisfaction, but he's also preparing a rhythm for you and for me. That word for rest is actually related to the Hebrew word for Sabbath, and that's a term perhaps you've heard. God actually commands Israel to follow the creation order that he's establishing there. God worked for 6 days, he rested on the 7th, and we as image bearers of God who are like him and represent him are called to actually walk in that same rhythm. Work 6 days and rest on the 7th. And God commanded that through what was known as a Sabbath, which was a day of rest. This was given to Israel through the law, first in Exodus chapter 20. I'll read just a few verses. God speaks to Israel in verse 8, says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy." So Moses told the Jews, he said, just as God worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th, you are called to walk in his creative design. And on that day, you rest from the labor of your work. But Moses goes on to explain that we don't just rest, but we also reflect on that Sabbath. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 12, he told Israel to observe the Sabbath day, to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or daughter, or your male servant, or your female servant, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. And here's the key. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day holy. So God commands the rhythm. He says to the Jews, take this day and don't work. But on that day, what are you supposed to do? Reflect on his work. That's what you're supposed to do. He said, on that day, remember that I'm the one that freed you from bondage. I'm the one who redeemed your life. I'm the one who rescued you. I created you and purchased you. I took you and called you to myself. And we're called to walk in that rhythm, is what the law said, to stop from work, but then also remember his work of all that he's done in our lives. And Jesus actually spoke of the Sabbath in his own ministry. Did you know that? Jesus was Jewish. He is Jewish. I'll add that word to it today because he still is. And Jesus, as he walked as a Jew on this earth, Jesus observed the Sabbath. Did you know Jesus would rest? And people were very controversial about the Sabbath, of how much work you could do and how little work you could do. And this is what Jesus said about the Sabbath in Mark chapter 2, verse 27. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What does that mean? Jesus is saying, you were not made for this day, but the day was made for you. You need this day. That's what he's saying. You need a day. That God established a rhythm as one who understands the creation, and he is the creator. And Jesus is saying, this day is a gift to you. You need a day. You need a day to cease from working and simply be with God, to replenish your body, but also your soul. And what's interesting, if you know throughout history, people have balked at this idea forever, just as some of y'all might be balking at the idea right now. And there have actually been atheistic movements over the centuries that have tried to get rid of this rhythm that God established. Did you know in the French Revolution in the late 1700s, they were trying to de-Christianize the region, and what did they do to disrupt that? Change the rhythm of the week. They got rid of the 7-day week, but you know what happened? It didn't last, it didn't work. Did you know in the early 1900s, the Soviet Union did the same thing? They tried to get rid of the 7-day week. They didn't like it because they were trying to remove God from the world and all the ways things were constructed. And you know what happened? Productivity went down, people were miserable, and it didn't work. It's almost like the one who designed the world knew the way it should operate. When you go home driving a car, there were some people that built that car. And there's a manual that's probably, if you have an older car like me, in the glove box. And that manual was written by the creator saying this was meant to operate this way. And if we don't operate it the way it was intended, it will not go well. And what so many people have failed to understand throughout all of civilization is that God created this world. And he knows how it's going to operate most effectively. And he says 6 days you work and 1 day you rest, because as Jesus already said, we need the Sabbath. And what I want us to talk about today is really both sides of this, is work and Sabbath. Because this is a rhythm that God established that's for our good. And what I want us to see is both ends of that in this text. So there's two different sections. I'm going to talk about these as succinctly as I can. But the first thing I want to discuss for a few minutes is this point. We were created to work. To work. That's what we see actually in the creation order. So before I talk about rest, I want to talk about work. We were created to work. And I would dare say for some people in our country and maybe in this room, resting isn't your problem. Maybe you have a work problem. And I just want to remind you, we were created to work. Work is actually not your enemy. Work is God's idea. God designed us to work. You might say, well, what do you mean? Theologically, did you know there in the text before the fall in Genesis 1 and 2, Adam and Eve are working? Did you ever catch that in the text? God told Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Bear fruit, do good things on this earth. Multiply, meaning have children. If you have children, you know that's a little bit of work, isn't it? Then he says, subdue the creation, meaning develop it, pull resources from it, use it in a way to bring flourishment to mankind. Well, that's going to take a little bit of work. Then he said, exercise dominion over the world. Well, that's leadership. That's going to take a little bit of work. God created Adam and Eve to work. Now you might say, but work is miserable. That's actually Genesis 3, and we'll get there in a minute. We'll get there in a few weeks. You need to come back for that sermon. Because of sin, what happened was work that was good then got corrupted through thorns and thistles, is what God will tell Adam. That sometimes we work and the result doesn't come the way we want. And what was good has now been fractured. But that doesn't negate the reality that you and I are called to work. We were created to work. In fact, did you know in heaven you're going to work one day? Some of you are like, man, this is the worst sermon ever. Why are you telling me heaven is filled with labor? It's not the labor you're thinking of. In Isaiah chapter 65, the prophet sees the new heavens and new earth, because remember the old Adam, he failed, and the old creation is broken. God sent a new Adam in Jesus Christ, and when he returns, there'll be new heavens and new earth that will be established. And in the new heavens and new earth, lo and behold, work is a part of the puzzle once again. This is what God told Isaiah in chapter 65. Verse 21, the Lord says, on that day, they, the redeemed, shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat, meaning we're all going to have to do some work to live and thrive. And he says, for like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long, here's the key word, enjoy the work of their hands. And won't that be a beautiful day when we all enjoy the work of our hands? Because if we're being honest, myself included, sometimes work's not enjoyable, right? Like sometimes work is a job and it's not actually fun. And we're doing things because we have to do them, not because we want to do them, and we're not enjoying it one bit. The good news is in the new heavens and new earth, we will work and enjoy. But because of the curse, which we'll get to in Genesis 3, sometimes work is hard. And not in the rewarding way, sometimes it's just difficult in a draining way. That this world is hard. But that doesn't negate the calling that God has given you and me to work hard. We were created to work hard. And I would argue for the Christians in the room, we're called to set the example in the workplace and work harder than anyone else. You might say, why do I say that? Because the Bible told me so. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10, Solomon, the wisest person on earth outside of Jesus, he said, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. He didn't say, give a half effort at everything you do when you go to work on Monday. No, he said, whatever your hand finds to do, what your boss tells you to do it with all your might. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, Paul said, whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men. Paul said, when you work for your real boss, God. That's who you're working for. You might say, I hate my boss. Good news, I have a better boss for you. His name is Jesus. And you can work for him. And when you work for that bad boss, you actually reflect Jesus to that boss, and he makes your work good. That we're called to work hard as unto the Lord, because we are working for the Lord as we bear his image. And so all of us in this room, we're called to work. We were created to work. Yet, as I said earlier, I think some people have a work problem because not everybody is working hard. Instead, some people are not busy, some people are busy-bodied. Some people are not busy, some are busy-bodied. What is a busy-bodied person? It's someone who pretends to be busy, but really all they're busy with is other people's business. That's what they're busy with. They don't have work of their hands that they're focused on, so they focus on and criticize the work of other people's hands. That they're always monitoring, always critiquing, always cutting down, always butting in, always interjecting, because they've lost focus and they don't have their own mission. That they're neglecting the work of their hand, so they'll be busy with the work of other people's hands. Some people are not busy, they are busy bodies. But then for other people, they're not busy on the right things, they're just busy on the wrong things. What do I mean by that? Sometimes we set our minds on very silly things. And sometimes they're not morally wrong things. Like for instance, some people in this room, maybe you're not busy with work, but you're busy on political blogs all day long. All day long. And God gave us time to steward. It's a gift. Time's actually given to us. To labor with that time, to do good, to bring good to others and glory to God. But sometimes when we don't walk in accordance to our purpose, we find another purpose, and that purpose oftentimes is destructive for us and others. Some people find the wrong things to devote their work to. This is why so often, especially for men, why do men, and this goes for women too, but I just speak as a man often in this context to men. I've known many men who have found really destructive habits. And one reason for that is they weren't busy with the right things. They got themselves caught up in stupid things because they weren't doing the right things that God called them to get busy in. Instead, they got busy in pornography, substance abuse. I've seen people who have had gambling abuse and addictions where they devote their time and energy and focus to destructive things instead of good things that will actually bear fruit as we're commanded to. And this happens in our life. A lot of us might have a work disorder in this room. But God has called all of us, I want you to see this, to work. And it's good. I've used this metaphor before, but I believe God made all of us as image bearers of him. He made us like big box trucks. You might say that's not a flattering image. Just stay with me for a second. He made us like box trucks. Because if you've ever driven a box truck, if you're going down the highway and there's nothing in the truck, you know what happens? It's kind of hard to drive, especially if there's wind out there, the thing's not weighted down, it can wobble because that truck was created to bear a load. But when you have a load in the truck, what happens is it actually starts to drive smoother. And in the same way, if you're not bearing any weight in your life and you're not working hard, your life is going to get wobbly. It's going to happen. Give it time. It will get wobbly because God made us to bear a load, for us to work hard for his glory and for the good of others. We were created for work. So I want to ask you just a couple practical questions that you can reflect on later. The first one is this: what are you working on? What are you working on? Then number two, are you busy or are you busy-bodied? Because there's a difference there. And then number three, are you working unto the Lord? Are you giving your best? Are you acting like Jesus is actually your boss? Or are you acting like that sinful, horrible person is your boss? Because that will change your work ethic depending on how you answer that question. We were created to work. God shows us this. He works for 6 days. He calls us to do the same. But then also what we see from God, and then as image bearers of God, is the second point that I'll spend a few minutes on now. We were also created to rest. We were created to walk in this rhythm. We were created to work, but we were also created to rest. God rested there on that seventh day, and he set an example for me and you that we're called to also follow suit. And I just want to remind you that if Jesus himself needed rest, you do too. Jesus observed the Sabbath. Jesus would get fed up with people. He'd get tired. He'd get weary. I say fed up, not in the wrong way, not like me and you in a sinful way, but he got tired and weary. And what did he do? He got away. He went and rested. So we have to rest too. And in America, actually, in theory, we're set up pretty well for this because we have a 5-day work week and 2-day weekend. And isn't that something? Because we talk about the creation order, 6 days in one. We actually have a 5-2 scenario here in the United States of America. How on earth did that happen? It's because of our Judeo-Christian heritage. That when the colonial people came in, they were actually following their Sabbath. They were observing a Sabbath on Sunday as Christians, which this is one of the greatest apologetics for why we know Jesus was raised on the third day. For centuries, the Jews would observe the Sabbath on Saturday, the seventh day. Jesus was raised on Sunday, Easter Sunday, and after his resurrection, his followers, those Jewish converted Christians and Gentiles, they began to gather and treat Sunday as that Sabbath day where they would rest and worship the Lord. And if you know anything about religious people, change is hard. It's very hard. Change is hard. And it would take something supernatural, perhaps the resurrection of Jesus Christ, to make all of Judaism in that first century start resting and Sabbathing under the resurrection of Christ on Sundays. So what happened then is in America, Sunday kind of became that day of rest. Well, we have a lot of Jewish people in our country as well. They pushed back on that. They wanted Saturday as well so they could observe their Sabbath. And then you can thank labor unions and Henry Ford. We ended up with a 2-day weekend. You can go read about it for yourself, but that's what happened. So for us in America, we have 5 days and then 2 days, which something like that should then make it easy. Well, then, golly, we must be the most rested people on planet Earth because we only work 5 days and then we rest 2 days. And I'm looking at a bunch of exhausted people in this room. And isn't that something that we have 2 days, but we have zero rest? Zero rest. Why is that? The government can't fix your rest problem. They can't do that. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the autonomy over your life. And they can call a weekend, and it doesn't mean you're actually going to rest. So why is it then, and even in the United States of America, with all the liberty we have, that no one rests around here? I'm going to give you 5 pastoral reasons I think that's the case. First one is this: pride. Pride. Why do so many people fail to rest, even within the Christian faith? Pride. What do I mean by that? In their hearts and in their minds, they think, I am invincible. That's what the wimps do. The wimps take time off, not me. I grind. I'm going to beat everybody. That's what all those weak people, those self-care people, that's what they do. Not me. I work. See how that goes for you. See where that pride takes you. It will be destructive to your home. It will be destructive to your marriage. It'll be destructive to your relationship with your children. It'll be destructive to your performance at work. It will lead to your destruction because that's what pride always does. Pride always leads us to destruction. But unfortunately, so many people, maybe you in this room, and I've been there before too, where we just think we're Superman and we're the exception. Can I just in love tell you this? You're not that exceptional. You're not that exceptional. You're not the exception. You're the rule. We all are, because we're image bearers of God. We're all on that same level field. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 30, we're told even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall be exalted. Even the young people get tired and wearisome. That's why we need rest. But for some, pride gets in the way. Number two reason I believe pastorally why people don't rest is this. I think it's pressure. It's not pride, but instead it's pressure. Instead of it being internal, it's actually external, the reason. What does that mean by pressure? Some would say, Jonathan, you don't get it. They need me. They need me on call. And admittedly, work and life relationships were much cleaner in former years when you would leave a physical office and not have a cell phone. Those days are gone. Now you got a phone. You're on call 24/7. You got work from home. Some of y'all literally work remotely from home all day long. So naturally, your home and work life are all messed up. And for some, because of that, you feel pressured. I can't take off. There's no way. They need me. But can I just remind you, you need God more than they need you. You need God more than they need you. And if you don't actually pursue God, you're going to be worthless to them anyway. If you don't do what he made you to do, then you're not going to perform there anyway. And no one's ever going to set up a boundary for you. You have to grow up and do that for yourself. That's how life operates. We have to make these decisions out of our own autonomy, even amidst pressure. We have to establish these rhythms. There's pride, there's pressure. For some, it's not pressure, it's fear. Fear keeps you from resting. What do I mean by that? You think if I actually rest and breathe and not look at my phone and take a day, I'm going to fall so far behind. There's too much going on. I can't do it. Can I just once again lovingly tell you, there's always going to be too much to do. This is how work operates. Work never actually ends. You catch that? It never ends. There's always more work. And so if you're fearful of, well, I can't because there's these things coming, can I say if that's what you're waiting for, you'll never rest. Because there will always be more. And I also want to remind you of all the commandments that God gives us in the scriptures, you know the one that's actually repeated the most is fear not. He says stop fearing. Instead have faith. And that's why he calls us to rest anyway, because rest requires faith. It's you trusting God at his word saying, if I release this, Lord, I'm just taking you at your word. And Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says it's impossible to please God without faith. And he says, bingo, that's the point. Trust me at my word. He says, build that rhythm into your life. Don't let fear win. Conquer it with faith. Number 4 reason why some never, ever rest is what I will simply call idolatry. Idolatry. And this one might sting a little bit. What do I mean by idolatry? For some of us, and I can be the same way, we think we're too important to take time off. That I have to work. And usually there's an idolatry thing deep underneath that in our hearts, where we've put our identity in the work of our hands versus in the Creator in whose hands we rest. That we think my whole value comes through what I do. So I can't stop doing, because if I stop doing, then I'm just being, and I'm just with God. But I have to be defined by my work. And I can't walk away because I love the way that I get the applause for all that I do. I am a fill in the blank with your profession, and it becomes an idol very quickly. And I'll just admit to you, this is not different for pastors, by the way. I know some very idolatrous pastors that struggle with this very concept. And what do I mean by that? This is an insider tip. I'm going to just let y'all know today. You know why some pastors will never take a Sunday off and not preach? Or they'll never take a vacation? You want to know why? You might say, well, they not have the time. No, they actually pretty much have the time. Do they not have the ability? No, they have the ability. Why don't they? Idolatry. A lot of it has to do with idolatry. Because some of us pastors get so used to y'all doing this to us when we're done preaching, we think this is what we live for. That I live for the applause of man instead of the obedience to God. And we become dependent on people instead of dependent on him. And so we'll never rest because we need you more than we need him. This happens all the time. That's why I'm so grateful Matt Gillum's on a sabbatical right now, by the way, because he's being forced to rest, which is a good and healthy thing. And what that does is it kills idolatry that can rise up in his own heart, and by the way, in the heart of the congregation. Because sometimes the church thinks, oh, I can only hear God through Jonathan. I can only hear God through Matt. Only Matt can run the ministries. And you know what's happening right now with no Matt Gillum? Church. Church is happening without him. Life's moving on. Ministries are going on. And sabbaticals actually murder idolatry in a church, which I love that. It kills idolatry. But idolatry can keep some of you likewise from resting. But then fifthly, this is the last one I'll talk about. Fifth reason why some of y'all struggle with rest is what I'll just call bad habits. And this is my junk drawer term to qualify several different things, but I'll call it bad habits. Now, what bad habits am I speaking of? What I mean is that you're, quote, resting, but you're not actually resting. You're off from work or whatever you do, which, by the way, work, I just want to be clear on this. Work is a lot of different forms. Some of you have a job like me that you go to. Some of you are in school. That is work. Some of you are on athletic teams, your practices, that is work. Some of you are stay-at-home mothers. By the way, that's harder work than all the rest of us, and that is a noble ambition. Some of you are retired in this room, and I hate to break it to you, you're still at work. You're still working, and God has work for you to do, even though you might not be compensated for it. But then why is it that we don't do our work? For many of us, it just comes down to bad habits, that we have the time, but we don't have the discipline. What does that look like? Why do so many people struggle to find rest in this country? I'll give one example. This will hurt some people probably. Some people are anxious all the time because they're chasing their kids all weekend long. All weekend long. And they're watching their children play ball, and they're chasing them as they chase a ball all weekend long, and they don't remember the last time they went to church, and they wonder why they're anxious and miserable. Maybe God created us actually to rest and to go to church. You can go Google me and test me on this, but actually, did you know that secular research has shown that people that just simply go to church every week, that they actually have markers that go up in their lives physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. There's scientific proof, because once again, maybe the Creator actually understood what he was saying about the creation. But why are some people, some families so tired all the time? It's because you won't make margin for rest. You have bad habits. And you keep chasing all these other dreams instead of chasing the living God that you need so desperately to thrive. For others, it's because you take the PTO and you take the time off, and this is your bad habit. You don't rest well because your form of rest in your mind is, I'm going to go home and watch my favorite Netflix show for 8 hours straight. I've done that before, so I'm not casting stones. But have you ever noticed it never makes you feel better? Have you ever caught that? Or I'll rest, I'm gonna sit home on the couch. And what do? You scroll on your phone for hours, more than you want to admit, and you feel just as anxious when you get off the device. This is bad rest. It's bad habits. The problem isn't that you're not resting, it's that you're resting the wrong way. So then the question is, how do we rest well? And this is where I'll land the plane and we'll close. What I want you to see biblically is that Jesus is the source of our rest. Jesus is the source of our rest. And if you try rest without Jesus, you'll only get half service. Like, we all can take naps and sleep and try some of those things, and they do help. But you won't find true inner person rest until you know Jesus Christ as Lord. Jesus is the source of our rest. I don't have time to teach it, but you can go look at Hebrews 4. Hebrews 4 talks about this, how Jesus is the fulfillment of our rest. He is the one we rest in. So then the question is, well, how do I rest in Jesus? Jesus provides us, first of all, eternal rest. That means he gives us peace with God. I have rest for my soul right now because I know if I died on the way home, I know where I'm going. It's my real home. I've felt the love of God in my life through faith in Jesus Christ. I have an eternal rest in my soul. And it's not because I went to seminary, by the way. It's because I know the living God, and you can too. Jesus gives us eternal rest, but then Jesus also gives us daily rest. And this is the invitation that Jesus gives in Matthew chapter 11. He says this. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus said, if you're tired, I'm your guy. He says, come to me. If you're weary and anxious, come to me. Because Jesus is our eternal rest, but he's also our daily rest. He gives us peace with God, but then he gives us peace from God. And that peace comes from the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, who dwells inside of each of us through our faith in the Son. And then he gives us peace that Paul qualifies as a peace that surpasses all understanding. You can find rest through Christ. I find rest every day when I spend time with Jesus before anybody else, and he renews my mind. I find rest in him throughout the day when I pray prayers that none of y'all ever hear in my mind. He reboots us, he renews us, he gives us that rest. And yes, he gives us rest weekly, and that's why I applaud you for being here this Sunday on the Lord's Day. But I also cordially invite you back to God's house next week on the Lord's Day, because he gives us rest when we're together. In Matthew chapter 18, he says, where two or more are gathered, I will be with you. And there is rest that comes when we fall in that rhythm of taking a day to remember God for who he is with his people. There's rest that comes for our souls. So I want to encourage you, work hard, but rest well, because you were created for this. It made me think back to the 1940s. Most of y'all will know the name Truett Cathy, because I couldn't preach a sermon about a Sabbath without talking about Chick-fil-A. And I thought about Chick-fil-A. We all wish we could have some chicken today. I know we all wish we could go to Chick-fil-A and have the Lord's chicken, but guess what? You can't. And why? It's because for about 80 years now, they have been observing the Lord's Day. And you know what's been happening because of that? The Lord is blessing the Lord's chicken over there at Chick-fil-A. Because Truett Cathy made a decision not years later in success, but it was actually when he was broke and he had everything to lose. In 1946, he built a new restaurant in Atlanta called Chick-fil-A that nobody knew. And he and his employees were killing themselves at work. 7 days a week, grinding, no end, couldn't make ends meet. And he saw this isn't sustainable. And as a man of faith, he made a big decision, a bold one. He said, we're shutting it down every Sunday. We're not opening it up. Which everybody said, you're an idiot. No way. How can you do that? You won't be financially sustainable. Well, now in 2026, did you know Chick-fil-A actually has the #1 revenue per franchise of any fast food restaurant? #1 revenue in 6 days. And it's because he had a conviction in his early years that I'm going to honor the Lord's Day, and I'm going to let my people honor the Lord's Day. This is what Cathy said back then, and I'll challenge you to live it out today as well. He said, we were not so committed to financial success that we were willing to abandon our principles and priorities. He said, I would not abandon my principles and priorities. And can I just encourage you, don't abandon yours. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Hold fast to those priorities and principles. You were created to work, so work hard as unto the Lord. But you were created to rest, so rest in rhythm. And when you do so, you will find that the Creator actually knows what he's doing, and life is working best when we walk in his creative design.